Hello gardener, welcome to my channel. Today I'm excited to share everything you need to know about growing a unique and massive squash variety called Tromboncino Rapicante. It can be harvested in 2 stages. In the early green stage, it is a perfect substitute for zucchini. In fact, I like it better than regular zucchini. And if left to fully mature until its rind turns tan, it can be used exactly like a butternut squash. This one here is turning dark green now, and then eventually it will turn tan. Not only is this crop extremely versatile, but it's a very tough squash cultivar and it produces a massive amount of food. I mean, just look at these baseball bat sized squash. If you're looking for a hardy, productive, and dual purpose squash, Tromboncino might just be your next favorite garden addition. So in this garden guide, I'm going to show you everything that you need to know about growing Tromboncino Rapicante from seed to harvest. If you're new here, hello and welcome. My name is Jara. I've been gardening all of my life and I'm a professional seed and plant nursery. I love to share my knowledge and teach others how to garden and grow food, so you've come to the right place if you want to improve your gardening skills. So let's start with a bit of background. Tromboncino Rapicante, or simply Tromboncino, is an Italian heirloom squash that's become popular for its resilience and versatility. Tromboncino is part of the Cucurbita moscata family of squash, which is the toughest or most disease and pest resistant types of squash that you can grow. Cucurbita moscata types of squash have extra thick, hard, and woody stems that make it hard for pests like the dreaded squash vine borer to get into, and they have a much higher disease resistance. I'm not saying that the C. moscata types of squash never get any pests and diseases. They just handle a lot of disease and pest pressure before ultimately dying out, which increases your chances of harvesting something. So if you're really struggling to grow squash, then focus on cultivars in the C. moscata family. And if you need seeds for Tromboncino Rapicante and other members of the C. moscata family, I have a bunch of them on my website. So have I convinced you to try growing this yet if you have not done so already? If so, let me teach you how to sow the seeds. General guidelines that will work for just about everybody is to direct sow seeds after your last spring frost date has passed. Just sow 2 to 3 seeds in a mound, spacing the mounds like 2 feet apart. Keep in mind that this is a vining plant, and I highly recommend that you sow the seeds right underneath some sort of vertical garden trellis. This is the vines of the Tromboncino growing behind me, just so you have an idea. It can grow and ramble across the ground, but this will make it easier for pests and diseases to infect the plants, and the squash will curl up instead of growing nice and straight. Keep the soil moist, and the seeds should germinate in about 5 to 10 days. Or to get an early start on the season, you can sow seeds indoors about 6 weeks before your last spring frost date to get an early start on the season. Just fill a solo cup with a few holes, cut at the bottom for drainage, fill it with sterile seed starting mix, sow 2 to 3 seeds per solo cup, and just keep the soil moist. If all 3 germinate, I leave them and plant the whole thing. As soon as anything germinates, it needs light to start photosynthesis and grow properly. I highly recommend that you use grow lights because the light from a window is not enough. Just to put it into perspective, if you're growing something that requires full sun once planted into the garden, I highly doubt the windows in your house will provide full 8 hours or more of direct sunlight to those seedlings. If they don't get enough sunlight, they grow slow and get long and thin, just trying to reach for more light. This is called legginess. This produces weak seedlings, which translates into weak plants once planted into the garden. So please supplement with some light if growing things indoors. In about 6 to 8 weeks, your Tromboncino seedlings should look like this. It is ready to transplant when you can gently pop the entire plant out of the solo cup and its root system holds the soil together. To transplant, build up a mound of soil right under your vertical garden trellis. Sprinkle in some organic granular fertilizer. I like to use Espoma brand Garden Tone. Then pop the plant into the hole and water it in. Gardeners in warm winter climates, meaning you don't get snow and your ground does not freeze, like me here in Florida, you have 2 opportunities to grow Tromboncino. Once in the spring, like I mentioned earlier, or you can direct sow seeds or transplant at the end of summer, like at the end of July or August, to grow a fall crop too. Next, let's discuss Tromboncino's ideal growing conditions so you find the best spot to grow it in your garden. Tromboncino loves the sun, so aim to plant it where it can receive at least 8 hours of direct sunlight per day. It even handles Florida direct sun, so no worries. For water, keep the soil consistently moist, but avoid overwatering. Too much water increases diseases and pests. Let the soil dry out a little bit in between watering. As for soil, it thrives in rich, well-draining soil full of organic matter. It is a pretty nutrient-hungry crop. If growing in poor soils like my native Florida sandy soil, you will have to fertilize to make sure that it gets enough nutrients. Mine is growing in heavily composted soil in this raised garden bed, but I still fertilize to get the most production and growth out of my plants. I like to use small doses like half a cup of an organic granular fertilizer like Espoma Garden Tone every 2 weeks. This will keep my plants healthy and productive all season, especially if you're gardening in an area with high disease and pest pressure. A consistent fertilizer regimen helps keep nutrients also consistent, which promotes lots of growth. Being that I'm in Florida, there's a high disease and pest pressure, these plants will get them, but fertilizing consistently helps make nutrients available so that this plant can put on lots of new healthy green growth to outpace all of those diseases and pests. One of the reasons I love Tromboncino rapicante so much is its natural resistance to common squash pests and diseases, and that's all thanks to its Cucurbita moscata lineage. However, it's not completely immune. The most common pests I get on my plants are these little green worms with white stripes along their back. They go by many names, pickle worms or cabbage worms. It's actually not technically a worm. It's the caterpillar stage of a moth that lays its eggs on squash plants specifically. If you notice chewed up leaves like this or small round black or orange balls on the surface of the leaves, that's actually the pickle worm's frass. Without a doubt, you have worms eating your plants. Sometimes you won't see them because they are nocturnal, but trust me, they're there. I like to spray with BT spray, which is an organic spray at the very first signs of chewed up leaves to quickly knock down the worm population. If you don't treat it right away, every day that goes by, the worm population increases, which will require more applications of sprays. Just make sure you spray in the evening when all the pollinators have left, and only spray the affected plants. Don't go spraying your whole garden. The most common disease you will encounter is probably powdery mildew. Don't confuse this with the natural silver variegation that many types of squash varieties have. Powdery mildew looks like a thin layer of dust on the surface of the plants. It is a fungus, and if you gently flick the leaves, you might even notice the fungus spores disperse into the wind. I like to spray with 1 cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water to clean and disinfect the leaves. Reapply every 3 days until you notice the spread of powdery mildew has halted. Pruning is not required when growing Tromboncino, but I do like to remove any yellow, diseased, old, dying leaves to keep the plants extra clean, open them up for better airflow, which will help reduce the spread of diseases. I have one very important tip for you all when it comes to increasing production of all types of squash, not just Tromboncino, and that is to hand pollinate the flowers. Squash have 2 types of flowers, a male flower and a female flower. The male flowers look like this. They have a long stamen in the middle covered with yellow powdery pollen. Squash plants will produce a lot of male flowers first before the female flowers start showing up, and there is nothing you can do to speed up how quickly it will start producing female flowers. You just have to wait. When the plant is mature enough to support production of fruit, the female flowers will come. Many say it produces a lot of male flowers first to attract bees into the area, so they are frequently visiting plants before the female flowers show up. Eventually, female flowers will appear, and you will know they are female because they will have a little baby squash at the end. In the middle of the flower is the female pistil. Pollen from a male flower has to get rubbed on or deposited on the female pistil in order for it to get pollinated and produce fruit or your squash. If it doesn't get pollinated, or maybe not enough pollen got on it, the little baby fruit on the end of the female flower will just wither away and die. Bees do help with pollination, but sometimes they miss a flower or just don't spread enough pollen. So if you want to ensure that every female flower gets pollinated and you don't miss out on the opportunity of fruit formation, I highly recommend you hand pollinate. It is not hard to do and is such an easy little trick to instantly increase production. Every morning after the dew has evaporated, like around 9 a.m., I will search for female flowers. If I find one, I will remove the stamen full of pollen from a male flower and rub it on the female pistil. And voila, it's pollinated. If it's raining or it's very humid or dewy, the male pollen is not as fluffy and doesn't stick very well. So that is why I like to do this in the morning once things dry up a little bit. Squash flowers open in the morning and close or just die out in the evening. That means they only last for about 1 day. You know it got pollinated because the baby fruit will start to grow bigger and won't wilt or die off. And these baby squash grow very fast. Like in 7 to 10 days, that little baby squash is ready for harvest, so check often. All right, so hopefully after following all of my tips, you arrive at the harvest stage. Tromboncino rapicante can be harvested in 2 stages. If you pick it while it's still light green with small white streaks, it can be used just like zucchini. In fact, I prefer it over regular zucchini because the texture is not as soft and it doesn't get all watery and mushy after cooking with it. It makes for the best spiralized zucchini noodles because of this. If you want to see how I make my spiralized zucchini noodles, check out my second YouTube channel for a recipe video, and I'll link that all below in the description. The skin is also very thin and tender, so you don't even need to peel it. It will store for a few weeks when harvested in this light green stage. The second option is to allow the squash squash to fully mature on the vine. It will turn from light green to a darker green to fully tan. The rind will get hard too. The inside turns sweet and orange in color. It has now basically become a huge baseball bat sized butternut squash. This long neck portion has no seeds, so that's a lot of seedless butternut squash flesh to cook with. I make a butternut squash and bacon pasta that is super amazing. I'll also link that recipe below in the description. This fully matured Tromboncino Rapicante squash should store for at least 3 months, just like other winter squashes. So that's everything you need to know about growing Tromboncino Rapicante. I encourage you to try growing it if you have not done so already. If you enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with other gardeners who might want to try growing Tromboncino Rapicante. Thanks for watching and happy gardening!